we've been talking about the seasons that come into our lives. Sometimes we're constantly wanting to go back to a previous season. We look back over our life and maybe the current season we're in is not the one we would prefer to be in. Or maybe we're looking back over a season of life that was very good, very happy, very profitable, but we find ourselves in a different season, though we desire to go back. We must understand that we cannot go back to a previous season. That's why there's seasons of life. They come and they go. Many times you and I need to learn to embrace the season of life that we're in. We need to look forward and really work hard with our decisions and our outlook to make this season or even the next season even better than that season we constantly have our eye fixed on back in the past. So as we think about seasons that come into life, the question that comes up is, can we control the seasons that come into our lives? Now, when you think about controlling stuff, are you a person that likes to be in control? I know I do. I prefer to drive than to ride in the passenger seat. For me to fly, I get a little bit nervous, a little bit fearful. To ride in a roller coaster, there's a little nervousness there. Why? Because I'm not in control. I'm not driving. You see, if I was driving that plane, or flying, not driving, if I was flying the plane, you say I would be in control, and that would remove the fear and the nervousness. But we all like to be in control, right, of certain aspects of our life. We like to be in control of our decisions. We like to be in control of our destiny, of the outcome of our life. We like to be in control of the classes we're going to take, and definitely the grades that come out of those classes. We like to be in control of our job and where we'll work and how we'll work. We like to be in control of the relationships we'll find ourselves in. Our destiny, right? We want to be able to control all those aspects. Now, while we can control certain aspects of those seasons of life, there's certain aspects of our seasons of life we cannot control, and we're going to look at that today. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, Solomon has really spent a lot of time looking at life, thinking through it, and as he sits down, he begins to journal and just to reflect about what he has experienced, what he has seen. And he begins to talk about these seasons of life. He says, to everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under the heaven. A time to be born, and a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck up that which is planted. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to break down, and a time to build up. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. He goes on to say, a time to cast away stones, and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. And he continues on making these great comparisons of one extreme to the other. So when it comes to the seasons of life that you and I experience, do we have any control over these? Well, first of all, certain seasons of our life are completely out of our control. They're completely out of our control, but they're in God's control. And he starts here with these two extremes, a time to be born and a time to die. He speaks of our birth and our death. You see, you and I have absolutely no control over this season of our life. We have no control over when, where, or to whom we will be born. That was completely in God's hands. David wrote about a beautiful picture, really, about us being created, us being in our mother's womb. He said in Psalm 139, verse 13, for thou hast possessed my reins. Thou hast covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. My substance was not hid from thee when I was made in secret, and curiously wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Thine eyes did see my substance, yet being unperfect, and in thy book all my members were written, which in continuance were fashioned, when as yet there was none of them. And you remember this, please, that you are fearfully and wonderfully made, no matter what you think or what anybody else says about you. But there was a specific time, a specific place that God said, okay, it's time for you fill in the blank, your name, to be born. And that is when your season of birth came to be. But he goes on the flip side of that and he talks about death. You see, you and I cannot control the day of our death. We all have an appointment with death. Now, we can make certain decisions that could speed up that appointment, but we have no idea the day, the time, the place where you and I will die. That's completely out of our control, but God does know that. And so these are two seasons that you and I have no control over. Now, there's a lot of time in between our birth and our death, right? Lots of other seasons that will come and go in our life. And there's many transitionary seasons in between the two extreme seasons that we'll look at. And he goes on to talk about a time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted. He talks about harvesting food, something that's a very big necessity for you and I to live. Now, you and I can't control that plant growing or that vegetable growing. We can prepare the soil, we can plant the seed, we can try to water, but everything else is up to God. We can do our part, and we must, but you have to see that season of plucking up that which was planted, harvesting it, is all in God's hands. Now, we can plant, but we can't pluck up unless God does the work in the middle. And so there's certain things that are out of our control because God has to make the seed germinate. God has to produce the weather. He has to make sure the sun is going to shine. That's out of our control. And there's many other circumstances that come into our lives that are outside of our control. You know, people can make decisions, and their decisions will ultimately affect your life for the positive or for the negative. But their decisions that they make are completely outside of your control. Someone could get in a car drinking and be drunk and drive and crash into you. You can't control that. You can control what you're doing, but you can't control that circumstances. And we could go down the list of all different types of circumstances that come into our lives that are outside of our control. Now, while God's sovereignty controls certain areas and aspects of our life, we are not puppets. And so in God's given free will, we see, secondly, there are certain seasons that are well within our control. They're completely within our control. Let's go back and look, a time to be born and a time to die. You say, well, I thought you said our birth was outside of our control. It is, but not our spiritual birth. You see, the Bible talks about we're born, but the Bible goes on to say we're born again. So you and I will decide if we will respond to the gospel. People around us, as we share the gospel, they will decide if they'll call on Jesus Christ as their Savior. And so the spiritual birth, becoming a believer, making that a season of our life, is in our control. And then it goes on a time to die. What do you mean? I thought our death was outside of our control. Well, the Bible talks about that a believer needs to die to self. We're to crucify the flesh. Jesus talked about that in great detail. If you're going to follow me, pick up your cross and follow me. Talks about us crucifying the flesh, dying to self. And so this is the idea of us surrendering to Christ. And you and I decide if we're going to surrender to Christ, if we're going to die to self. And these are seasons of life that you and I have control over. You see, we can plant the seed. That's a season of life. We can do that in spring or summer. We can plant the seed, do all our part, and we can harvest it. Right? But we can't do anything in between. And so we can control certain circumstances that come into our life through our decisions and ideas. You see, decisions have consequences. Ideas have consequences. Beliefs that you and I hold determine our behavior. And so good ideas have good consequences. Bad ideas have bad consequences. And such is life. And so there's seasons of life that you and I cannot control. What should we do? Should we get frustrated, angry, aggravated? That's what I want to do, if I can be honest with you. But I have to learn to embrace the seasons, regardless of what he or she did, or regardless of what just the circumstances of life seem to bring into my life. I have to embrace the fact that there's seasons. And the good thing about seasons is this: they don't stay forever. Unfortunately, if it's a good season, we want it to stay around forever, but it doesn't. It will leave. It will fleet away. And then those bad seasons that we wish would go away, they will eventually go away, and another season will come in and replace it. You know, life is like an hourglass. The sand just slowly seeps through like a waterfall, piling up at the bottom until all that sand at the top is finally gone. You see, your birth that's out of your control starts your hourglass. It starts my hourglass. And then when death occurs, that's when the final grain of sand has trickled through and fallen down. And so everything in between is seasons of life. You know, I've often wondered how different my decisions would be if I knew when the sand was run out. You know, life is like that. I picture it sometimes as a clock. There's a number on my clock at this very moment. There's a number on your life clock at this very moment. And it's running backwards. And I don't know how close I am to mine. I don't know how close you are to yours. But every second that you're listening to my voice, that number is getting smaller. That clock is running closer to the number 0, which is our death. Now, that's not to be have a terrible perspective on life, or to be dramatic or mellow or anything like that. It's just the reality of our life. Life is like a vapor, right? It's here for a moment and it vanishes away. But what you and I do with our life, with the sand that's in that hourglass, is up to us. And so you and I can do great things with it, or you and I can lazy it away. You and I can not be good stewards of what God has given us. And so every moment that goes by is ever closer to that end. And so the bottom line is you and I need to live every day like it's our last. I'm sure you've heard that. But it's so true. So many times I catch myself in seasons of life getting frustrated, aggravated, wanting to go back to the previous season because it was so fruitful and profitable, and the season I'm in now just seems to be stagnant and not really moving along. I think about Elijah. I just read about him this morning in my personal time, and he goes to King Ahab and starts his ministry, launches it off, powerful. And then God has him to go into the wilderness for 3 years, to the brook of Cherith, to Zarephath, for 3 entire years. It would seem so purposeless. But as you look and see, God had great purpose and great preparation in that season of his life. And so certain seasons of life are completely out of our control. What do? We embrace this fact and we make the most out of those seasons. Certain seasons of life are completely in our control. What are we to do? We embrace this fact and make wise decisions and make the most out of those seasons.